Minister, can you share with Canadians the kind of security measures that will be in effect?
But we have talked with the RCMP, with the Solicitor General and the head of the RCMP, and with the Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army. And everybody has increased the level of security everywhere. As you heard, there was some things done at the airport for security. We have welcomed the planes who had to land somewhere, and this has caused some problems at some airports. I've been in touch with the Minister of National Revenue to make sure that everything was to be done very smoothly there, and there's nothing else I can add.
Prime Minister, what kind of assistance can Canada offer to the United States?
What type of assistance are you proposing for the moment? And so, well, if they need assistance, for example, doctors, physicians, that type of resource, then Canada will always be available. We're ready to help those people. There are hundreds of thousands of victims, possibly. And we will be ready to intervene whenever we're requested to do so. For the moment, I don't know what the situation exactly is. We don't know exactly what's happening. We don't know how many victims there are, how many are injured, how many people are in hospitals in the United States. Our representative in New York is keeping us informed of the situation. Same thing for Washington. And at the present time, we know that the situation is under control, and when they talk to the authorities of either of these cities in question, they will tell them that the Canadians are there to help them.
Sweden this week and again New York next week. What's the status of your international travel plans?
I have not made any final decision. Of course, I'm not going to Halifax today. I was supposed to be Halifax at this moment. I've cancelled that, and there will be no meeting with the official meeting with the Prime Minister or President of Slovakia that was supposed to be in Canada tomorrow.
Is there any evidence that Canada was used by the terrorists to get into the U.S.?
We don't have any.
Do you have any concerns?
Under any threat at any
Is
Canada under any threat?
Not that I know of. Merci.
In terms of security, what's been done? Well, you can see what the security is. You can see that security has been increased on Parliament Hill. Our consulates in the United States have been closed. Our employees in Washington and in New York, as also in the United Nations, our delegation there in the United Nations, those people, I don't know if they've received instructions to return home or not, but here in Canada we've increased security adequately, and what has been increased, the people can see that.
When you first heard about this and what...
When I heard about it at the end of lunch that I had with the Premier of Saskatchewan, we were informed that there was something tragic, and we didn't know what it was. So as soon as he left, I opened the TV and I received phone calls from Mayor Cap and so on. And I've been in touch with ministers and with the head of the RCMP and the Armed Forces all morning, and I had the staff with me at 24/7.
Can you tell us, will there be any rescue teams?
When you heard the scope of this, what was your reaction? Well, the reaction was, it's horrible, it's terrible.
Alors, merci beaucoup.
So thank you very much. Thank you.
The Prime Minister and his comments in Ottawa to the events in the United States, and his offers of help to the U.S. and his suggestion that Canadians offer as much help as they can as well, whether that's in blood donations or in the removal of experts and medical officials to the United States if that is warranted in the days ahead, and it certainly appears, in fact, that is what will be the case. This, once again, still a live shot from New York City, and if you've been watching this over the last couple of hours, the situation certainly doesn't seem to be getting any better in terms of the smoke and debris pouring up into the air. If anything, it seems to be getting worse. The whole southern end of the Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, has been evacuated or has been ordered evacuated. The only people in there right now are rescue officials and emergency officials who are trying to deal with the situation. One can only imagine what it's like on the ground in that immediate area as Fires have broken out. Other buildings have become vulnerable. We're told at least one other building in that immediate area did collapse under the strain of the debris that showered upon it from the collapse of the World Trade Center. But just exactly what's going on in that immediate area, we can't tell, although obviously from these pictures, the situation still appears to be very, very serious, as the rescue efforts must be just incredible that are taking place there now. There's still nobody... Okay, we now have some reaction to this. Other than the President of the United States, the first official reaction out of the U.S. Government, a Pentagon official. This happened just while Prime Minister Chrétien was talking, so let's, I think we've got the tape rewound. Let's hear this just outside the Pentagon building in Washington.
To phone their families and loved ones immediately to let them know they're okay. And if they are among the injured or the casualties from this, then we will work our way through to identifying them and getting their names out to their loved ones. We will find a way.
Where are the injured going? Where are the injured being taken to?
A variety of area hospitals.
How big was the penetration of the plane itself, Admiral? How many rings at the building?
I don't know.
That was a Pentagon official. Very limited details coming out of that. We can tell you that earlier in the morning it had been assumed that the incident at the Pentagon, where an aircraft had crashed into the side of the Pentagon building, was just being described as a small light aircraft. It turns out it was far from that. It was a big aircraft. It was a jumbo jet. It was a 757 that went into the side of the Pentagon building. How extensive the damage is, how many casualties is still unknown, but it is being described as extensive, the damage at the Pentagon and the casualty list at the Pentagon building. We're trying to step back a minute and have a look at just how this all unfolded over a period of about 2 hours this morning in New York and Washington and other parts of the United States. Let's call it a timeline, for lack of a better description. At 8:48 a.m., all these local times, obviously, in New York, a large plane crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. It was a commercial airliner that had been hijacked. At 9:06 a.m., just 18 minutes later, a second plane, once again a hijacked commercial jetliner, crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:43 a.m., a little less than an hour from the first incident, another aircraft, this being the third one, another hijacked commercial airliner, crashes into the Pentagon building, and we're now told it was a major airliner as well, a 757. At 10:05, the South Tower, the second tower, hit. 59 minutes after it was hit, the South Tower collapses. At 10:30, an hour and 42 minutes after the first tower was hit, it collapses as well. So in a period of 102 minutes, both towers were hit and were collapsed. This was the final tower collapsing at 10:30 this morning, New York time. Just an incredible scene as the towers fell to the ground. It is not known how many people were in those buildings at the time they collapsed, but it is expected that there were thousands. Now, just before we went to hear the Prime Minister's comments, we just reached Peter Bergen, a freelance journalist, an expert on terrorism and security matters, someone who has spent a great deal of time looking into the story of Middle East terrorism. He has interviewed, I believe, Osama bin Laden, who some people are already pointing fingers at today as a potential suspect in what occurred today. Give us your thoughts, given what you know, what you've seen, and the background that you have on this subject.
Well, you have to ask yourself who has the capability and who has the motive to do this kind of operation. Obviously, a very sophisticated operation. On top of that, this is obviously Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda, which is the Arabic for the base, which is the name of his group, which is really a sort of transnational, loosely affiliated group of like-minded individuals who are opposed both to the United States and to Israel, amongst other things. It appears in this operation that you had suicide bombers, which obviously is part of the bin Laden operational modus operandi. We saw that in the embassy bombing in Africa in '98. We also saw that in the attack on USS Cole in Yemen in 2000. You also would have had to have people who had some degree of sophistication to be able to fly planes, apparently. Bin Laden has pilots in his organization. It was also an operation that required quite sophisticated timing. If you remember the U.S. embassy bombings in Africa in '98, you had 2 U.S. embassies attacked within 9 minutes of each other. Unprecedented event. And also, it was unprecedented for a U.S. warship in Yemen to be attacked as it was in October 2000. Bin Laden is the principal suspect in that. And finally, there is a set of warnings that Bin Laden has been planning something. In the '98 embassy bombings, Bin Laden had a press conference talking about good news in coming weeks. Before the Cole bombing in Yemen, there was a tape that circulated implying some action against U.S. Military targets in Yemen. And just this summer, there's been a videotape circulating of Bin Laden saying that the victory against the USS Cole in Yemen was just the beginning of the war against America would continue. And people familiar with his organization said that there were plans in the pipeline that were very real, and it is possible that we are seeing the outcome of those plans. Of course, we don't know. We probably won't know for several days who exactly is behind this attack. It took the United States government 13 days after the U.S. embassy attacks in Africa to blame Bin Laden. The attacks in Africa happened on August the 7th. The United States retaliated on August the 20th with missile attacks on Bin Laden bases in Afghanistan. He was obviously not there at the time, continues to live in Afghanistan in some undisclosed location. One of the things I think you have to ask yourselves is, obviously, this is an act of war, attack on the Pentagon, an attack on thousands of innocent civilians. Obviously, it's going to require a military response. The last time the United States made a military response was after the U.S. embassy attacks. It was not terribly successful. Bin Laden was not in the camp that was attacked. There was also a cruise missile strike against a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan, which was alleged to be a chemical weapons plant. That turned out to be not correct. So the last U.S. military response was somewhat flawed. I think the U.S. military planners will have to be very careful about what they do if Bin Laden is indeed fingered in this. I know from American officials that they have put Taliban officials, the group of religious warriors who control Afghanistan, have put them on notice that if they can trace an attack back to Bin Laden, even if they can't find Bin Laden himself, they sure can find the Taliban government ministries, and have told them in no uncertain terms that if Bin Laden is fingered for this kind of attack, that the Taliban themselves may be the subject of cruise missile attacks. Anyway, there's all the sort of action that we may see coming in the next couple of weeks as a determination is made as to who is behind this. But I think it is conventional wisdom amongst all sorts of U.S. government officials, and certainly my take, that there's no one else with the capability and the motive right now to pull off this kind of extraordinarily sophisticated operation.
Tell us about the motive right now. Why now, if it is him?
Well, this date, September 11th, I don't think have any particular significance for him. We've seen a cycle of operations, August of '98, October 2000. I had felt that we hadn't heard much from the organization recently. As a general proposition, he is very opposed to the United States government. He thinks he's at war with the United States government, but that war includes not only military targets, but civilian targets. In this case, he's chosen both a military target, the Pentagon, and a civilian target, the Trade Center. You may remember the '93 Trade Center bombing. That was conducted by the mastermind of that bombing was a man by the name of Ramzi Youssef, who not only trained in a Bin Laden camp, but also lived in a Bin Laden guest house. The '93 Trade Center bombing can be seen almost as a sort of warm-up for this much, much more catastrophic bombing. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of that bombing, hoped that the two towers of the World Trade Center would collapse into each other. That didn't happen, but clearly this time, whoever has managed to pull this off was able to destroy both of those towers. A building that was designed to withstand earthquakes, a building that took a huge car bomb in its basement 8 years ago without really much damage, certainly nothing compared to this. So in terms of the motive, if it is indeed Bin Laden, he's been opposed to the United States government for years, and that opposition has intensified, particularly with the ongoing, what's known as the Second Intifada that's going on in Israel, which has caused passions in the Middle East to be enraged, and America is regarded as being the, if you will, the sponsor of Israel, and being behind these the Israeli responses or not taking sufficient measures against them.
Tell me, Peter, a number of these different organizations, when they commit terrorist acts, are fast to claim responsibility for them in the aftermath. Yeah. Has it ever been the pattern of Osama bin Laden to claim responsibility for any acts?
The short answer is no. Claims of responsibility are to a penny in the sense that anybody with a dime and at a 25 cents at a phone box can claim responsibility. And typically in these instances, there are multiple claims of responsibility, most of which are bogus. In the 80s, it was very common for people to claim responsibility, and even in the 70s. Recently, claims of responsibility have not happened, partly because, of course, you suffer very direct retaliation if you do claim responsibility. The bin Laden modus operandi is more to imply, in a kind of general sense, action in coming weeks or coming months, as we've seen in previous incidents. And then, sometime after the date say, well, that was a very good job, I wasn't involved, but you admire the people who pulled this off. So no direct claims of responsibility from the bin Laden organization. I don't anticipate any, and, there may be some time from now a statement from him admiring the appalling events of today.
You know, a number of the reports that we've seen in the past few hours would seem to indicate that the United States did not feel that they were under any direct threat at this time.
Yeah.
How do you react to that? Because
well, I think that the United States felt under very direct threat in the Middle East. I mean, there have been a series of very, very stern announcements by the State Department talking about imminent attacks on our embassies in the United States. The U.S. Embassy in New Delhi was targeted for attack by bin Laden just in June. The embassy in Yemen was targeted in the same month. It closed temporarily. FBI agents investigating the USS Cole bombing there were pulled out. So there was a lot of attention in the Middle East and also on the Indian subcontinent, but not in America, because I think the United States has been somewhat lucky in the sense that there's only been one major act of international terrorism, which was in '93, some time ago now, and perhaps people's guard were down. We do know that if you remember, right at the time of the dawning of the new millennium, an Algerian guy was arrested on the border between Canada and the United States with a makings of a pretty significant bomb. He kept very silent about what his intended target was. The initial read was that it was Seattle. Only recently did he start talking to federal authorities and saying that, in fact, it was going to be a bombing attack on LAX airport right at the height of the Christmas and New Year's season. It would have been a catastrophic bombing. It was averted by a sharp customs agent who noticed that this guy was sweating a little bit too much for it being in the middle of December. So the United States, this is a long-winded way of answering you. The United States has been, I guess, lucky, and obviously that luck ran out today. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of intelligence agencies and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm sure there'll be many congressional investigations about how this happened. Clearly, this was a wide-ranging conspiracy involving a lot of people. Why wasn't it penetrated? Why didn't we have the human intelligence to find out about it? And that answer, I mean, who knows right now, but I'm sure it'll be the subject of many investigations in the coming months.
Last point, how comfortable or uncomfortable are you in seemingly joining the chorus of those who feel that Osama bin Laden was the one who was in the best position to be able to have coordinated this attack?
I'm comfortable on the following grounds. When the U.S. embassies blew up on August the 7th of 1998, I knew that day it was Osama bin Laden. And when the USS Cole was attacked that day, I knew it was, obviously these things come out later, but I've met him in '97, I've been researching his organization for over 5 years. You have certain gut instincts, and I was keenly aware that we hadn't heard much from the organization, that there were these threats that were floating around out there, and this for him is the home run of the century, and this is exactly the kind of operation that he's wanted to pull off, and here it appears to have happened. If it's some other organization, it'll be very interesting to tell. It seems unlikely that it's some sort of domestic organization. It seems that it is an overseas group. and there's just an extremely limited number of people who could pull this off.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We appreciate your time and your thoughts on this based on the experience that you've had investigating this story over many years. Peter Bergen joining us from Washington. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
All right, a quick update on the situation in New York as the smoke and debris continue to pour into the sky of the skyline of the New York City. We're told that there's another building on fire, not surprisingly, in the immediate area of where the World Trade Center towers collapsed. At least one other building has since collapsed. The debris, and I think you saw in some of the pictures, having fallen in areas immediately around those twin towers, caused extensive damage to other buildings. At least one of them is on fire, and we're told that a good deal of the smoke is starting to come from there. Briefly, we can tell you that the U.S. Red Cross Agency is asking for blood donations from across the United States, not just in New York and Washington. No surprise there. We've already heard the call go out in this country as well. We're also being told now that the Canadian Blood Services, the agency that oversees this country's blood supply, says some of the victims of today's U.S. terrorist attacks will be flown to Ottawa and Toronto to be dealt with at hospitals in this country, just from the simple fact that the staggering numbers of people that you can imagine are involved in something like this. Although we are told that rescue efforts in the immediate area of the where the Twin Towers were have not started yet, because they're still trying to put out fires and other assorted problems from that immediate area. So this is, clearly going to take a while, not surprisingly. You drop a 120-story building, two of them, you can just imagine what it looks like in that immediate area. Apparently Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital, which has a trauma unit, is one of those destined for the injured. There have been discussions between a number of different hospitals and Health Canada about providing blood to the United States. So once again, we suggest to you that no matter where you are in this country, you should be in touch with your local Canadian Blood Services agency if you have the ability to donate blood at this time. It is clearly going to be needed. Now, we heard from Peter Bergen and his thoughts, and not the first today to be pointing the finger in a specific direction based on general knowledge of what has happened today and their studies of what's happened in the past. There's that phone number for those who are concerned about any of their relatives in the United States, specifically in the New York and Washington areas, 1-800-387-3124. We'll leave that up for a few moments if you're rushing to get a pen. Meanwhile, we go from the pictures in New York to Calgary, where Saeed Soharwardli, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that name, sir, but I just had it handed to me, from the group Muslims Against Terrorism, clearly has your reaction to what's happened today and your thoughts on the kind of things that are already being suggested as to why it happened.
Thanks, Peter. On behalf of Muslims Against Terrorism and Islamic Supreme Council of Canada, I like to express my condolences to those who suffered through this terrorist action, and we definitely condemn this horrified action carried out by we do not know who, but whoever is responsible for these kinds of terrorist actions all across the United States. That is not permissible anywhere in any religion, regardless of their ethnicity or background or religious affiliation. Muslims of Canada, they are definitely disturbed by these actions, and they deplore these things as much as any other Canadian does.
Now, you know what days like this can be. There can be at times a rush to judgment in terms of how these events may have unfolded, and you've already seen in a number of circumstances where there are suggestions based on past actions of why this may have happened, and fingers being pointed specifically. And just heard Peter Bergen, who's not sort of drawing names out of a hat. He's basing his assessments on the kind of work he's been doing for the last decade, but pointing fingers at Osama bin Laden. What are your thoughts when you hear remarks like that?
Yes, this is what disturbs me quite a bit. If you remember the Oklahoma federal building case, people jumped to the conclusion and they accused Arabs and Muslims for these terrorist act. But later on we found out that it was not carried out by any Arab or a Muslim person, and it was carried out by an extremist in the United States. I mean, this is a very bad thing, and this is what I am very disturbed about, that people should not be jumping to conclusions. They should not be pointing their fingers towards a specific group or a person or religious affiliation. Muslims are against terrorism more than anybody else. I mean, in Islam, it is completely forbidden to destroy any property, to destroy any civilian person, to carry out these kinds of actions. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through his life and his companions and his followers, never committed these kind of sins. So how can a Muslim can commit these kind of sin? I'm not sure why Peter Bergen was pointing out those fingers towards certain people, but I assure you that we condemn these things and we deplore these things. We suffer through these things as much as anybody else. So jumping to a conclusion and discussing about certain Arab groups and Muslim groups and just projecting and giving perception that it might have been done by those and they have been engaged in the past, that does not mean that this, especially today's horrible terrorist actions, was carried out by a certain group. So we need to wait and we need to go through the detailed process of investigation. Unless this is completed, we should not be finger pointing to anyone.
All right. Words of caution, and we appreciate you expressing them here today. Saeed Sohrawardy joining us from Calgary with the group Muslims Against Terrorism. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, from Calgary, let's go to Vancouver Island, where we're joined on the phone now by Canada's former Minister for External Affairs, Lloyd Axworthy, who's now in the world of academia in BC, out on Vancouver Island today. Mr. Axworthy, good of you to join us. I can imagine, like everyone else, your horror and shock at the events that have unfolded across the United States today, and specifically in New York and Washington. But one of the reasons I'd like to talk to you is to try and get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes at this hour. You've been in the chair for situations, nothing similar, obviously, to this, but serious international acts of terrorism, where I'm sure you were on the phone with your counterparts in the United States trying to understand what was happening and how things were unfolding. What happens on a day like this behind the scenes in terms of international relations, who's talking to whom and about what?
Well, Peter, the most important thing is for the various countries that are allies and friends of the United States to reach out. It's encouraging to see the kind of assistance that's being offered on a humanitarian front and to offer a haven for airlines. I think on the political front, though, it's also important that there be a real message of cooperation in this matter, to say that while the attack were centered in New York and Washington, it's something we all face. It's a threat to security for all human beings, in effect, and in this way, we have to find the best ways of cooperating, both in the immediate term, but also this is clearly a call to much more serious action internationally to offset and countervail this kind of horrible security risk.
Now, we have heard, obviously, from Prime Minister Chrétien and Tony Blair in London, other world leaders. From the United States so far today, two very brief comments from President Bush, no comments from anywhere else, from the Vice President, from leaders in the Pentagon or the State Department. A brief comment from Colin Powell coming out of Peru. But does that surprise you that here we are almost 6 hours after the first attack, that there hasn't been any more of a coordinated effort by spokesmen from the U.S. government in trying to calm the situation, trying to calm the fears of Americans at this time?
I must say I found it a little strange. I think President Bush was certainly upfront, but the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and others, the Justice Secretary, I think are all in a position to provide some caution and care to American people. It could well be that they're just state of confusion. I mean, the attacks on the Pentagon in Washington, as your reporters have shown, have created a chaos in terms of any organization. It may also well be that they're just sitting down doing some serious planning as to what goes next, because I think what still gives me a shiver is that this may not be over, that these coordinated attacks are clearly the work of highly organized and sophisticated organization, and therefore one isn't sure whether this is another shoe to drop somewhere. Where I hope not. I desperately hope not, but one doesn't know.
I see that Tony Blair has ordered that all aircraft stay on the ground in Britain, that there's no overflying of Britain until this situation is sorted out. Emergency cabinet meeting that went on in Ottawa today. We heard the Prime Minister's remarks at the end of it, and I assume he's going back into one now. I know cabinet conversations are secret, but give us the kind of thing that would be going on in those kind of discussions.
Well, I think the first real issue that they have to face is what does this mean for Canada? And I think the actions taken in closing airports and responding effectively is the first requirement. There is a security issue. And secondly is to engage pretty actively in whatever international communication that has to be undertaken. And I think thirdly, and I hope that very quickly we will start coming forward with the kind of outreach or the offer of sharing this burden with the United States. You know, there's a lot of your commentators, Peter, watching the news today, are talking about retaliation and quick responses. I think it's very important in this circumstances that things be done the right way, and that you and I talked in the past about what I've always called the human security problem, which is that the threat is no longer the nation states; it's against innocent people, and that's what we've seen today. And that requires a much different kind of answer and solution than simply putting higher walls up and bigger fences and more guards. But that's part of it. But there has to be a much broader international effort and resources committed to this than we've ever done before. I mean, the world has changed dramatically today. You know, we could be going, if we're not careful, into a garrison state, which would greatly affect our open societies, or we find some way of trying to deal with this problem in a much more concerted and effective and focused way than we have in the past.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Lloyd Axworthy joining us from British Columbia today, of course, the former External Affairs Minister, Foreign Affairs Minister for this country. We do thank you for your time, Lloyd Axworthy, in BC today.
Okay, Peter.
Okay, in a moment we're going to be going to New York City, where the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has made remarks, I believe. In fact, he just made them a few moments ago, and we have them on tape, so let's listen to what he has to say.
We are all traumatized by this terrible tragedy. We do not yet know how many people have been killed or injured, but inevitably the number will be high. Our first thoughts and prayers must be for them and for their families. I wish to express my profound condolences to them and to the people and government of the United States. There can be no doubt that these attacks are deliberate acts of terrorism, carefully planned and coordinated, and as such, I condemn them utterly. Terrorism must be fought resolutely wherever it appears. In such moments, cool and reasoned judgment are more essential than ever. We do not know yet who is behind these acts or what objective they hope to achieve. What we do know is that no just cause can be advanced by terror.
The UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, with his condemnation of what's happened, but calling on a calm and a reasoned approach now to what happens next, underlining the fact that no one knows yet who was responsible for these actions today, and that, once again, as others have said, not to jump to any immediate conclusions. Some of the earlier tape from today, the incredible sight of that second aircraft slamming into the side of the World Trade Center, the second tower to be hit. and within 90 minutes both towers had crumbled to the ground. That aircraft was a hijacked commercial airliner, and it had slammed into the second tower about 18 minutes after the first one, and there it is again being shown to you in slow motion. A horrendous image, one that will live with us now for the rest of our lives. You will be seeing that picture in its various forms. The World Trade Center now on the ground in rubble. Its occupants, unknown the numbers, but quite possibly tens of thousands. The New York City skyline considerably different now. Both towers are gone. These pictures taken, as we said, between 10 and 10:30 this morning as both towers collapsed under the incredible damage that was caused to them by the slamming into them of the commercial airliners that had been hijacked and targeting then at that point the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And we have, if you've been with us all day, been showing these pictures over and over again. They are dramatic, they are the story, they are what happened, and they are unlike anything we have ever seen before in real life. On the ground at the time all this was happening was a New Yorker by the name of Jennifer Kennedy. She joins us now by, first of all, we're going to the mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani. Let's hear what he has to say.
Innocent victims of this horrible and vicious acts of terrorism, and our focus now has to be on saving as many lives as possible. We have hundreds of police officers and firefighters who are engaging in rescue efforts in Lower Manhattan. I want to thank Governor Pataki for the incredible cooperation and coordination, and including deploying the National Guard that will be available to relieve our police officers and firefighters and emergency workers in the next couple of hours. The governor and I just spoke to the President of the United States. The coordination with the federal government from the time of the first attack has been excellent, including closing off the airspace around Manhattan and doing everything that can possibly be done in the face of this barbaric act to make the city secure. And we will strive now very hard to save as many people as possible and to send a message that the city of New York and the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists, that our democracy, that our rule of law, that our strength and our willingness to defend ourselves will ultimately prevail. And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal. Everything is safe right now in the city, and the people who are doing the relief effort need all the help they can get. And then, Governor, thank you very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the President, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, while this is a horrible attack and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude, we will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately, and I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way, and we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We
second explosion?
believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
Mr. Mayor, could you tell us, do you expect any further attacks on New York? Is there anything to indicate that there could be more bombs, more planes out there? I know originally there was a report that 8 planes had been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by...
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed, and we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us?
Government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for the people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give us an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now in Lower Manhattan? The scope of this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. And the governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600 as of about 15 minutes ago in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, and before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
Also blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66th in Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed, and it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. And we finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to
Mr.
that.
Mayor, there was a gas explosion related to this as well. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible explosion.
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a precaution
about where these aircraft came from? There was a report that may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts. And
Governor, do you
What about security for the rest of the
there should be
city
any
now that this is
retaliation on the
happening?
part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is just compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war?
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this has happened?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything we can to make that point.
Jennifer Steinauer, please. Just a housekeeping thing. Can you tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer,
Can
please.
you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subways and the schools, the courts?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released, I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway is doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan. And throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many police and fire are involved? How many police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers, that they come in, or like
All NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now, and we're going to need all of them. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they get information?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
Have there been any reports of looting or anything like that? Any lawlessness? Mayor?
There have been no reports of lawlessness, no reports of looting. As I said, we saw a lot of people that were part of the escape effort, and they seem to be conducting themselves in a very, very sensible way, a very deliberate way. They seem to be helping each other. So I don't think we have any reports like that at all.
So the only National Guard we'll see will be in Lower Manhattan, in the bomb site area. They won't be patrolling the rest of Manhattan.
No, the purpose of it is to help with the relief effort. We're going to need the help of the state, surrounding areas with heavy-duty equipment.
When will they be arriving?
National Guard troops, some have arrived already, and we expect to have up to close to 2,000 between the National Guard and the state police by later this evening.
Mayor, bridges and tunnels will have to stay closed.
I think everything is closed for now, and then maybe in about an hour or two we can give you an update on what the plan will be for tomorrow.
We saw a lot of lightly injured people walking out of the area because obviously the emergency services were needed for the very seriously injured. People covered with dust. Some people had difficulty breathing. Is there any health advice to give to people who are caught in this thing, who are not necessarily at risk of losing their life, but
I think well, obviously if you feel ill or you feel that you've been affected by it, you should go to a hospital and get checked out. But if it's just discomfort that you feel, then you can do basically what we did, was to wash our faces off and get rid of the clothes and get to an area where you can breathe in fresh air.
How many people were in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack?
I mean, it was business had already started. It was right before 9 o'clock. I don't know.
Tens of thousands?
Yes. Approximately. Someone just gave me a number of approximately 10,000, but that's a guess.
How long will the city remain on a heightened state of alert?
Until we're told not to. I mean, until the FBI and the police department and the federal government tells us that we shouldn't. Right now, the city is should be on a state of alert. Now, instead of frightening people, that should make people feel more confident that everything is being done to keep things secure. And again, let me emphasize that the reason for the National Guard, because I heard the question before, is to help with the relief effort, not because there's any fear of any other problems in the city right now.
How is the
Mr.
Port
Mayor, can
Authority
you tell us about
protecting
the other
buildings,
public
Mr. Mayor?
buildings, City Hall, One Police Plaza? When will it be safe for you to return to?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. Hopefully soon, but I don't know the answer to that.
And we heard reports that One Police Plaza was evacuated. Was that true?
No, the command center is open.
And it was never.
We have people in the command center right now.
Mr. Mayor, there have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about. And we're not going to know the answer to that until much later. And maybe we should just close now and give you a briefing later. And I would just ask everyone, I talked to Cardinal Egan before because he's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Everybody should in their own way say a prayer and ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than vicious, cowardly terrorists, and we're going to overcome this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, Mayor.
Do we know when the next briefing will be?
An hour and a half.
The governor of the state of New York, George Pataki, and the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, trying to deal with a terrible situation in their city. The after effects of the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil, the worst attack of any kind on U.S. soil ever in its history. 2 commercial jetliners destroying the World Trade Center, those twin towers that dominated 110, 120 stories above the New York skyline, both destroyed, crumbled to the ground. That was 4.5 hours ago. This is still the after effects of that incident as smoke continues to pour out of the immediate area. There has been an evacuation of the southern end of Manhattan, southern end of New York City. We can show you some pictures that have been taken over these last little while, and it is incredible. Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people walking away from downtown New York. Some covered in the soot and ashes of the debris from the fallout from the crashing down of those 2 buildings. But these people are just leaving the city in droves, some with their faces covered, their mouths covered, trying not to inhale the exhaust and debris of that area where the explosions took place. The bridges, the roadways of New York City. These are some of the survivors who come out of that immediate area.
And just blew out the plaza we were on.
It was complete dark, there is no light. So, thank God somebody with little light came up because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris and...
How'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to... What did you do?
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Back now to the live pictures from New York City as the smoke continues to pour out of that downtown core area. The whole southern end of New York City, Manhattan Island area has been evacuated. Let me update you on a number of things before we go out to Vancouver for an update from Terry Malewski at the Vancouver International Airport. First of all, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States, now saying there will be no commercial air traffic allowed in the United States before at least noon Eastern Time tomorrow. They also report that all aircraft are on the ground now. All aircraft that had been in the air following the events of this morning, everything is now on the ground. There will be no aircraft allowed in the U.S. or over the U.S. until noon Eastern Time tomorrow at least. A United Airlines pilot says there are unconfirmed reports that a passenger on one of the jets that was hijacked earlier this morning was on a cell phone in a bathroom calling 911. The pilot says shots were fired, was shouted over the cell phone. These are unconfirmed reports. There have been a number of reports of the various aircraft that were hijacked today that people were on their cell phones, including the crash in Pennsylvania, also including the crash at the Pentagon, where one of a Pentagon official, a former Pentagon official, was said to be on a cell phone trying to get word to the ground of what was happening in the air. The latest on the situation in Washington for President Bush. As we know, he was in Florida this morning when this happened. He was flown then to a U.S. Air Force base in Louisiana, where he has spoken to the American people. It's unclear where he is now. Meanwhile, his wife and children who were in Washington have been taken to secure locations. According to the White House, a Reuters news dispatch filed from Air Force One, which is the president's aircraft, says the following: First Lady Laura Bush and presidential daughters Barbara and Jenna Bush have all been taken to secure locations, according to White House spokesman Ari Fleischer. Fleischer said President Bush talked with Mrs. Bush before leaving the Air Force Base in Louisiana for an undisclosed location. It's still not clear where the president is heading to tonight, and that underlines once again just the incredible seriousness of this situation still now, hours after the explosions and the hijackings took place, that the American people are not being told where their president is or is being taken to. Mrs. Bush and the two 19-year-old twin daughters were in secure locations, the White House says. The U.S. Navy has dispatched aircraft carriers and guided missile destroyers to New York and Washington after the attacks. The U.S. Navy's John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier is one of those being sent in. Here's a remarkable statement out